Will death finally unite me with you forever? And at last bring an end to the agonizing torment of this harsh and painful separation? The very thought of death not only does not give me any fear, but actually brings me relief. It gives me peace and makes me rejoice, setting aside all the other consequences that death brings with it. Notice, if we analyze, we see that Luisa had already adopted that view of death as Jesus wanted. She says, I set aside all the other consequences that death brings with it. She no longer focused on whether she would die from one illness or another, or at what age in her life, or what her relatives would do, or so many other human thoughts that we might have. She says, I set all of that aside. For me, death means that I will come to be united inseparably with you, and that's why I rejoice. Well, then Jesus answered her, my daughter, truly, that extravagant fear of dying is foolishness. Notice Jesus' language. This fear of death is foolishness. From his point of view, of course. This is because he views the transition of life differently than we do, looking past our earthly anxieties toward an eternal reality that we often struggle to comprehend. Because everyone has all my merits, my virtues, and my works as a passport to enter heaven. We already saw this a while ago. And whoever unites their will to God's and unites their whole life to God's and lives in the divine will, that is the passport to go straight to heaven if they die in that state, because their entire past life has already been remade by Jesus and joined to his and has become his as well. So what fear of death could there be in light of this perspective? As it says here, it is an extravagant fear that is outside of common sense. I truly feel that everyone now possesses all my merits, my spiritual virtues, and my lifelong works as a formal passport to enter heaven, since I have freely given them to everyone as a special gift. The problem is that not everyone accepts them or unites themselves to Jesus, and they die on their own, alone, without being connected to Jesus, or being connected only as far as they know. So having given them to everyone as a gift and much more. If by taking advantage of this gift of mine, someone has added their own, all their acts, or the acts they have done, with all these things, what fear could there be of death? With this most certain passport, the soul can enter wherever it wishes, and everyone, out of respect for the passport, honors it and lets it pass. As for you, this profound and total absence of any fear of death comes from having encountered and dealt with me, and from having experienced for yourself just how sweet and deeply beloved is the union with the Supreme Good. Luisa had already experienced that the greatest happiness is union with God. That is why it was what she desired most. As I was saying, we all have this tendency to seek happiness precisely because God made us for happiness. The problem is that we look for it where we are not going to find it. But Luisa, who already knew what complete and total happiness was, that is full union with God even in this life, but even more so the fullness of heaven, well, that was the only thing she desired. That is why not only did she not fear death, but she actually longed for it. Because she did not see death as death, but as union with God. She saw all this spiritual aspect with spiritual eyes. I say this so that we too may begin to see death in this way. And you should truly understand that the most deeply pleasing homage that can ever be offered to me is to sincerely desire to die, in order to be eternally united with me in spirit. This means that the love of that soul is already quite great, doesn't it? Truly nothing else matters to her anymore. She no longer cares about her little worldly things. Instead, all her focus, attention, and desire are set on God and on uniting herself more intimately with Him. That is why it is said to be the most pleasing homage to God. If we have not yet come to desire death in order to be united with God, let us analyze why. It is because there are still earthly things in our hearts. We still have human goals here. We would like to live longer, to enjoy our family more, to see our children grow up, for the younger ones to study and earn a degree, to enjoy this human and worldly life, and so on. This means that they do not yet love God above all things. You should know that the most pleasing tribute that can be offered to me is to desire death in order to be united with me. There are people who also wish to die, but because of their problems and because they no longer see a solution to them. It's not about wanting death for its own sake, but wanting death to be united with God. And this is the most beautiful disposition of the soul for purification. You see? The one who truly desires death in order to be united with God is someone who has already detached themselves from all earthly things that hinder us from going to God. And if we are still in this life, or if that soul is still in this life, it is because it is God's will. But their heart is no longer attached to this world. Their heart already lives in heaven. And God knows the things of this world. It is because God wills it, so that we may continue performing acts to unite ourselves more and more with Jesus. They no longer see things outside of God, outside of God's plan. They do not see people outside of God's plan. That is why they are not attached to anything. And that is why it says here that this is the best purification. And without any interval, to pass directly along the ancient path. Good heavens above, what an incredibly long delay this is. We truly fear the coming of death simply because we have no desire to descend into purgatory. Well, I suppose that's already a bit better. But in any case, it means that we still see ourselves as imperfect, that we still lack love for God. That's why we have purgatory, because we know there were gaps in our love for God in our past life. But really, in light of the perspective, in light of the panorama of the divine will, that should be removed, because as we've already seen, Jesus is going to remake our entire past life. And if we always want, in every act that remains to us, to continue living in the divine will and to grow in it, then what is there to fear about death? Because the soul that lives in the divine will and dies at any moment should be prepared for death. In fact, it is prepared for death. If we don't feel that way, then it means we still need to immerse ourselves more in the Lord's will, to think less about ourselves and our own affairs, and to focus more on the spiritual world, because we must keep in mind that this is why we are in this life, to go to heaven. As we have seen, this is our purpose. How is it possible that we set our purpose here on earth? If the main purpose is that at a certain moment we are going to present ourselves before God, so that we can go and rejoice with Him, we must constantly keep that purpose in mind and not forget it. What does the world do? It removes thoughts of death and of God's entire plan and immerses itself in material, temporary things that come to an end, and even in sin. There is disorder outside of God's plan, and then death comes to them, and it is a true tragedy that destroys their human plans. Because by having this mistaken and erroneous view of life and death, they don't know where they come from or where they are going. So by putting things in order at this point, by knowing our origin, our destiny, and our purpose, then death is not a tragedy at all. It is the normal progression toward where we are headed in order to be happy. It is our purpose. In fact, my father used to say that death is the greatest act we can accomplish. The greatest act is not even, for example, communion. if that were the greatest act? If it were, we would die and go to heaven, and God wouldn't give us the chance to keep performing other acts because it would have been so great that it fulfilled us. No, that is not the greatest act. The greatest act is death, because if that is well lived, you see, it leads to heaven. We can't perform any other act after that because that one fulfills us so much that it brings us to heaven. And to fulfill that last greatest act well, God gives us our whole life. Our entire life is preparation for that act. The better we live our whole life in union with God and now in the divine will, the greater that last act will be, the more perfectly fulfilled. So far from removing the thought of death, we should keep it in mind every day. That's where I'm headed. How am I going to act today so that on the day God calls me, I can be well prepared to carry out that last act perfectly well? And our entire daily life will be preparation for that last act. That's what we're aiming for, right? God also gives us the gift of His will as life for that very reason, so we can do one act, then another, and on the day of our death, we will already be complete and fulfilled. So how is it possible that we forget about that last act? No, quite the opposite is true. We should strive to carry out all of our daily acts within the divine will, constantly reflecting on the fact that each single act is another vital step to help us prepare for a peaceful death.
I would like to make a brief comment on this topic of death. Because the fact of dying, as we've already seen and as Alejandra already mentioned, is the last act. It's an act that the human being performs. It's the last, the greatest, or the most important one that a human being performs in their life. We've already seen, for example, the topic of aborted children, but regarding this topic of death, we can reflect a little. When we consider the individuals who choose to take their own lives, to put it another way, we must recognize that the act of suicide carries a tremendous weight, considering the profound spiritual consequences that it inevitably brings, because they are consciously choosing to refuse the gift of life. To live, they distance themselves from the entire plan that God had for them. Voluntarily, that person says goodbye, like, God, you know what? I'm not interested in what you have for me. I don't care if it's holiness, if you are calling me to something special in life. I'm not interested. I don't want to know about you. I want to die. I want to set aside everything you've done. In what a difficult situation that soul will find itself when it stands before God at its particular judgment. With what face will it look at God? It's something that is very, very difficult. Through the divine will, we can extend our profound spiritual assistance and compassionate help, thanks to those dedicated souls, to assist them in that incredibly challenging, painful, and deeply lamentable moment they find themselves in at the very end of their lives. In the same way, we can reflect on people who have already passed away, or those who are dying now, or even those who are currently contemplating or actively planning to end their lives by means of euthanasia. That is precisely why the Church also firmly condemns it. It is something truly disastrous because of its grave and lasting spiritual consequences for the eternal soul. The profound consequences that these acts bring are truly and utterly abominable because of the grave situation in which they place this immortal soul before the presence of God, at the most critical and decisive moment of one's entire life.
Our lack of preparation for our death, for example, yesterday, when we reflected on what we meditated about our Blessed Mother, did we make any act of universal gratitude toward her? We can set the intention, as we have been doing, to keep it elevated. This act should not be just a one-time thing. I want it to be repeated continuously in all the acts I have yet to perform throughout my life, and also at the moment of my death. This act is ongoing. So, when we reach the moment of our death, even if perhaps our intellect or our memory does not recall this act of gratitude to the Blessed Lady for everything, we still carry it in our will, and that is the act. Then our death will be enriched with an act of universal gratitude to our Blessed Mother. Then we come to know another truth of the divine will, and we make our intention, our act of doing it, of carrying it out. But we must have that intention to say, and all the other acts I have yet to perform, I also want to fill them with this act I am doing, and also the act of my death. So, what happens then? That from now on, we begin enriching our entire death, and when we reach the moment of death, it will be the gathering of all our acts done in the divine will. We find them all like suns in the act of doing good. That is why it is the most magnificent act, because by then we will have performed thousands of suns of good acts that contain infinite goods. And at that moment, we will find them all in action. That is why the death of a child in the divine will is a celebration. Once we have completed all the acts that God had determined for us to do, we will no longer be able to do any more, because God already has everything prepared for us, because we are more than full. We have already filled heaven with all our acts. And then there is only the last one left, which is death, to gather them all together and to pour into heaven with everything good we have done and with everything we allowed the divine will to accomplish in us. So, isn't that such a remarkably different and profound perspective on death? So, in other words, this also means spiritually uniting our own eventual death to that of Jesus. Jesus performed all the acts, as we know, in the divine will and on behalf of everyone, and he encompassed all our lives. He also performed the act of death as a gathering of all the other acts, as the seal of all the other acts, and to give us the possibility of dying as he died and of sharing in the merit that his death produced. How many effects did the death of Jesus produce? It simply completed the work of redemption for every human being. So if we unite ourselves and from now on set the intention, my God, at the moment you call me, whether it be through illness, through an accident, however it may be, suddenly or not, from this moment I set and have the intention to unite my death to yours with all the blessings that this produced. Death will never catch us off guard, because we are already prepared and have made those acts. So at the moment when God calls us, our death will be worth as much as that of Jesus. And we will repeat in ourselves the death of Jesus and all the blessings that this produced for God, of completing his glory throughout all creation, extending toward every person in the world the noble task of bringing them each and every one of the blessings of the life of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we will go to heaven abundantly enriched with the fullness of all those divine merits. That is God's plan for us. That is exactly why I say that. From this moment forward, every single one of our actions should be a form of preparation for death, because that's where we're headed and that's what God wants. Right now, we need to keep working on one act, then another, one understanding, then another, because we are not, well, we have to gain understanding and perform the act because we are human. God made us this way. That's why he gives us time, so many years, so many acts. So if we don't waste them, we will arrive complete at the moment of our death, and it will be a triumph. To make it a glory for God to have enclosed within our soul all the blessings he wanted to place there, and for our soul to have accomplished all the wonders he wished to perform, because we did not go against God's plan, but on the contrary, we united ourselves willingly and with all our love to that plan of God for our life and for our death. So it is by seeing things with these eyes, with these spiritual eyes, that it no longer matters to us what illness we will die from or under what circumstances. It is better to offer from this very moment the death that will come later, and the way in which we will go willingly. If not willingly, I want to make it so for myself. From this moment, I accept my death as your will, and I want to live in your will. So then, what fear is there in death? Even if we were to die in the very next moment, we are already prepared. Or if God grants us more years, well, whatever he decides is best. but we will never be unprepared for death. It will never catch us off guard, as it does so many in the world. Yes, because their goals are, well, we have already seen that man's plans are completely different, opposed, and limited compared to God's magnificent plan for each one of us. And what will the death of a child of the divine will be like in this context? Well, if we are truly saying that every single act of ours, even something as simple as a heartbeat, when done in the divine will and united perfectly with Jesus, produces and contains eternal blessings that we simply cannot comprehend in this earthly life, and possesses a special, unique, and immense happiness that we will be able to share joyfully with all of the inhabitants of heaven for all eternity. Given this scenario, let's imagine if God allowed us to see just one of the acts we have desired to do in His will. We would die of joy upon witnessing this extraordinary and magnificent miracle of the divine will acting within our human will, and every one of the profound blessings that this produces for eternity and for every single person throughout the world. That is why God does not let us see that in this life. God is so good that He says, I am not going to let them see that first act they did in my will, because I want them to keep filling their hands with more and more blessings. I will keep it hidden from them so that they do another act and learn more, and another act and learn more, so that I can keep giving my blessings and my happiness, and so they can keep working and doing more acts for the glory, good, and happiness of themselves and all of heaven. But there will come a moment when God may allow us to understand a little more about what a single act done in His will truly means. And when He reveals this to us more clearly, that's when our hearts will no longer be able to withstand so much happiness. And that will be the death of a child of the divine will. It won't be because of pain or despair or whatever else, even if they are suffering too, yes. No, but it won't be because of that. It will be because the eyes of his soul are being opened even more, and upon seeing the marvel that has been worked within him and all the good that has been produced, his body will no longer be able to contain it. His soul will depart, and he will begin to enjoy all the happiness from each one of those acts that the divine will accomplished. And in an instant, he will find himself in the heavenly homeland without having gone through purgatory or any of that, nor through judgment. What judgment? If all our acts are already in heaven in God, that is what it means to live in the divine will. The volumes taking from Jesus are in Jesus. There's no way Jesus would judge himself, right? In an instant, we will find ourselves in the heavenly homeland, surrounded by beautiful suns, which are all the acts done in the divine will, by immense happinesses. And from that very moment, we will be able to share them with all the blessed. Those happinesses that God gave us the grace to enclose in our acts by making His will known to us, so that you can see that these are not just my stories. I am going to read you something that Luisa wrote about this. Maybe it has already been read on another occasion, but it is worth meditating on. I have not taken it out of context because of the death of Father Annibale de Francia, who was an extraordinary confessor of Luisa and who was very interested in having Luisa write. He gave her a stricter obedience. Luisa had already been given the obedience to write down everything that Jesus told her, but he sensed those divine truths that produce so many spiritual benefits and told Luisa to write down every word and not to omit any of the things that Jesus told her. Such was the love of this priest, and so deep was his conviction that everything about Luisa was divine, that he was the first in the world who wanted to publish Luisa's writings. He began by publishing the Hours of the Passion and some other selected chapters taken from Luisa. In fact, his intention was to make all those writings available in order to do good for everyone. But, well, God took him. If we look at it from a human perspective, God took him suddenly right in the middle of it, just as he was beginning to publish the writings. But of course, it wasn't really sudden. He was already prepared with those acts in the divine will. And one day, on the day of his death, Luisa was also left wondering, saying, well, what happened? I thought he had the mission to publish everything, but no. And let's see what Jesus' response is. My daughter, take heart. You must surely know that absolutely everything that soul who is so incredibly dear to me ever did. Well, no, before continuing. Let's apply this to any soul in the divine will, any of us, any of you who dies. Let's apply it to our own death if we truly want to live in the divine will as well. Not just Father Anibale. You must know that everything that soul so dear to me did, every piece of profound knowledge that he studied and acquired about my will, which includes the knowledge and the acts themselves. So much additional light was enclosed in his soul. So, every single additional fragment of profound knowledge is a significantly more radiant and powerful light that this soul possesses. And each piece of knowledge also places a completely different light deep within the essence of the soul. Don't you truly think that this is a remarkable thing to consider? That they are all the same lights? No, each piece of knowledge has its own special characteristic, just like the acts have a special different light that needs to be completed. That's why it's so important to read all of Luisa's writings. Otherwise, you'll be missing different rays of light needed to complete that sound. Each piece of knowledge is also a greater light that it possesses, and each piece of knowledge places a different light in the soul, each one as beautiful as the other. But not only light, but also with the seed of the different happiness that each light contains. You see, each truth about God, each light we understand about God, contains a special happiness that is unique and different from the others as well. Because each and every single thing the soul can do, not just because each and everything the soul can know of good, with the inherent will to actively implement and put it into daily practice within itself. Let us say it again, knowledge and action. The inherent will to know by deeply recognizing and understanding, with the firm will to actively implement and put it into practice. The soul remains in possession of the good it knows, of that light. It remains in possession of that light, of that happiness in its soul. On the other hand, if it does not have the will to put into practice the knowledge it acquires, because this can happen, there will be those who do not hear these teachings, and so they will not have them in their soul. They will not know them, they will not have the actions, but there will be those who know them and do not perform the actions. This can happen, of course. That the knowledge stays with us, we hear it, it brings light to our intelligence. How wonderful, now I understand many things. But we do not live it out, we do not have the will to put it into practice. So then, to put it in Jesus' words, what happens? One thing is intelligence and another is will. We may understand, but if we do not want to do it, the will does not come into play. And one takes possession of those truths and that knowledge when one acts on them with the will. First, this is the path of knowledge of God, and really of all knowledge. It begins with the intelligence, which enlightens us. Look, this is how it is. But what is missing is the act of our will. I want to do it the way my intelligence understands it. That is how I want to act. That is when the will takes possession of the good that the intelligence has already understood. But if there is no deliberate and conscious act of the will, and you do not truly take possession of that inherent good, it remains only within the intellect and not in the will itself. Because you did not actually want to do it, the will is not involved, and thus it does not remain deep within the soul. Because everything the soul can possibly know as good, if it puts it into practice with the active will, it fully takes possession of the profound good it knows. On the other hand, if you have that knowledge, if you have that bright light in your intelligence,
but you do not have the internal will to put that knowledge into practice, it is like when a fool simply catches the fleeting scent of a beautiful flower or washes with the freshest water. For a brief moment, he may feel the lovely fragrance of the flower or the refreshment of the cool water, but since he does not possess the flower itself or the source of the fresh water, little by little the fragrance and the benefit of the coolness or the scent of the flower will eventually fade away into nothingness. He does not possess it. Ah, how beautiful it is, but it is not yours. It will fade away, but it will not remain within you. What a difference it would make if you possessed those flowers and always had them there, or that water. And you will find yourself empty of the fragrance. Well, if you do not have the will to put it into practice, if you possess neither the flower nor the source of water, little by little the fragrance will fade away, and so will the benefit of the freshness of the water. So you will gradually find that you are completely devoid of all the fragrance, and the freshness you once enjoyed will have entirely disappeared from your life. This is how knowledge is when you have it, the benefit of knowing it, but you do not put it into practice. They remain in the intellect, but nothing happens in the will, and they fade away, and the soul is left empty of that good, even though it may have understood it at the time. So, this explanation is for what Jesus is about to say. Moreover, it is very practical for us to understand the mechanism of truths and how to live them out. Every new thing we learn from Luisa, as far as we come to know and understand it, we must have the will, all the will to put it into practice. And it is then, when it remains in the will, that this truth truly becomes life within us. And if we keep repeating that intention over and over again, that is what forms life in the divine will. It's not just about reading, and then thinking we are already living in the divine will. No, it's about reading and doing and having the will to put it into practice. That's why it's often recommended to read slowly so you can assimilate it and make it part of your life, to have the act of will. Well, now then, that soul. In this case, Father Annibale's soul had all the will to put into practice the knowledge he had acquired. So much so that, upon seeing the immense and great good he felt within himself, he truly wanted to make it known to all others by publishing it. So, as long as he acted here on earth, the physical body, which was more than mute, was effectively concealing that radiant light from each piece of knowledge and from each single act. I don't know. From each piece of knowledge and from each act in which he put that divine knowledge into practice, it was an additional light. As we saw, it was continuously accumulating in him, but the body was the vessel that contained that light. But as soon as his soul finally left the prison of his physical body, he found himself clothed in the light he possessed immediately. That is the glorious death of a soul in the divine will, and all the many seeds of eternal happiness that he possessed. According to each piece of knowledge he learned and each act he performed, they began to develop within him, because here it's nothing more than the little seed, as I was saying, which is not yet to feel happiness. That's why only the seed is given here. But once the soul leaves the body, those seeds begin to develop, and he began to feel the beginning of the life of true beatitude. And immersing himself in the eternal light of his Creator, he found himself in the heavenly homeland. From that moment of his death, he rejoices there, where he will continue his mission according to his will, according to my will, assisting everything from heaven. If you only knew the extraordinarily vast and profound difference in glory, in beauty, and in happiness that exists between those who, upon departing from this earthly realm and passing into the next, carry within them the radiant light with the seeds of so many eternal joys, and those who receive only the hollow sound of their servant, a difference that is truly beyond all human measure and comprehension. The difference is so great that the distance between them is even greater than that between heaven and earth. These are profound and spiritual concepts that we can only truly see in the kingdom of heaven. But at least they greatly expand the horizons of our limited human perspective and make us focus on what will ultimately define and shape our eternal happiness, that is, on knowing more and living more deeply in the divine will. Or if mortals knew the great benefit they gain by discovering a true good, a truth, and making it their own, absorbing it into their very lives, would they compete for it? Would they forget everything just to know a single truth? And would they give their lives just to put it into practice? Hopefully, that's what happens to us when faced with these truths, right? Luisa says, and while Jesus was saying this, I saw before me the blessed soul of Father Annibale next to my bed, clothed in light, suspended above the ground. He was staring at me intently, but without saying a single word. I also felt very great. She too was amazed, deeply moved by the wonder that is the beauty of a soul that had lived and died in the divine will. And Jesus continued to speak. Observe closely the manner in which he is completely and wonderfully transformed. My will is pure light, and it has transformed that soul into light itself. My will is truly beautiful, and it has given him every single one of the radiant hues of perfect beauty. Because he wanted to unite all his acts to God, so now God was giving him a hue, letting him be. He let God work. And he gave him every single hue and shade of absolute perfect beauty. He is eternally holy and was completely sanctified in every way. My divine will possesses the fullness of all knowledge and wisdom, and the human soul was fully invested with the depths of divine knowledge. In short, there is nothing that my will has not given him. Oh, if everyone understood what the divine will means, they would set everything else aside, they would not concern themselves with doing anything else, and all their effort would be solely to do my will alone. Well, God is inviting us to let that be our death, our eternal happiness, by offering us the writings of Luisa and the possibility of living those writings. May this serve as an encouragement to live more intensely in the divine will. Well, although time is almost up, I'm going to read the last little part because otherwise I would be left interrupted and it wouldn't be complete. More than 2 weeks later, Luisa once again sees Francia's father. She says, after this, I found myself outside of myself, and while I was looking for my sweet Jesus, I found the Father near me, okay? He was completely joyful and told me that now he could speak, as if he had already assimilated the first great surprise. Of course, being here, trapped in the body, all the light, his soul detaches from the body and begins to see all those wonders worked in himself by God and by him. So, of course, the first time, which was the very day of his death, he couldn't say anything to Luisa. But after some time had passed, he had already assimilated it, and he himself spoke to Luisa and said to her, "You honestly have no idea just how many incredibly beautiful surprises I found there. I truly could not believe it when I was finally standing on earth. And I couldn't even imagine it, I had no idea. Although I thought that I must have done some good by publishing the Hours of the Passion, by publishing them, I knew it was something good, that's why I wanted to do them. However, the incredible and unexpected surprises that I have recently discovered are absolutely marvelous, deeply enchanting, and possess a profound and rare kind of beauty that I have truly never seen before in all my life. They exceeded my expectations. No matter how much imagination we might have about all this, it turned out to be an even greater surprise to see what it meant to have lived in the divine will. The surprises I found are marvelous, enchanting, of a rare beauty never seen before. All the words, each and every one that refers to the passion of our Lord, are transformed into light, each as beautiful as the next, all interwoven with one another in harmony, and these lights are always growing. Moreover, not only did he do all the other good things, everything he did in his life, but here there is something more. These lights continue to grow as creatures perform the hours of the Passion. Because it was his will for them to be published and published in every language, this is mentioned in her letters. So each time, and to do good for everyone, right? So every time we do the hours of the Passion, glory is increased for Father Annibale and for Luisa, because Luisa wrote them, and for Jesus and the Blessed Virgin. Well, and I'll say it for my father too. I wish everyone would read the hours, even though I can't publish them, but well, that's part of it. I keep making them known as far as God allows me, but my will is that everyone would know them. When that soul arrives in heaven and the hours of the Passion continue to be done, they could keep receiving more glory as well and more happiness. Happiness will keep growing, and for everyone as well. So, as the creatures do the hours of the Passion, more lights are added to the first ones. Also, what a beautiful family atmosphere, isn't it? That is truly the spiritual union of the family where we all cooperate with each other for our eternal happiness and share it. That is the family of the divine will here on earth and in heaven. I will also tell you much more about this. But what truly surprised me the most were those few specific words regarding the divine will that I had previously published, right up until the point where I had spoken extensively about the hours of the Passion. Now I am going to talk about the few chapters that were published. Every single word and saying is transformed into a sun, not just into a simple light, but into an entire, brilliant sun. These, magnificently clothing all of the surrounding lights with their golden rays, bring forth such breathtaking surprises of radiant beauty that one is left completely enraptured, deeply enchanted, and lost in a state of pure ecstasy. You can't imagine how surprised I was to find myself in the midst of all these radiant lights and these brilliant suns, and just how deeply happy I was to be there. And how I thanked our highest good Jesus, who had given me the opportunity and the grace to do it, to know the divine will, to live it, to make it known. So I ask that you too please express your deepest and most sincere gratitude to Him on my behalf for all the blessings received. Therefore, let us all come together to offer our heartfelt thanks to the Almighty God for this truly extraordinary and miraculous gift and His boundless and divine grace. He places it in our hands and in our lives, and let us make the most of it, because, as I tell you, it will shape our eternal happiness in a way that we cannot even remotely imagine, no matter how much imagination we put into it. Well then, let's see if with this your fears about death will finally go away. On the contrary, well, this is volume 22. It's one of those volumes that normally I wouldn't, but, well, since it serves for everyone's benefit and for the topic to illustrate, that's why I read it. Well, now let's go to lunch then. All right, among the questions, here is one, which continues a bit with the last topic. Does the soul that lives in the divine will die? No. If we are looking at this perspective, this is no longer really what we used to understand as death. Well, instead of answering you myself, Jesus is going to answer you through this chapter. My beloved daughter, For the soul that faithfully does my will and lives entirely by my desire, there is no such thing as death. Eternal death is for the individuals who refuse to follow my will, because they must die to many things. They must die to themselves, to their passions, to the world. But for the one who does my will, is there really anything left to die to? Because they have already died to all of that in life. By entering into living in the divine will and dying to their own will, they have already died to everything that others will die to at the moment of death. There is nothing left for them to die to. They are already accustomed to living from heaven. So what is heaven? Where do we believe the blessed are immersed? Is it in a place that we call heaven? No, what we call heaven is God Himself. They are immersed in God, in His will, and that is what forms their happiness. So when a soul here on earth makes the profound choice to surrender and die to its own will, and instead chooses to give life to the divine will of God, it is already living a truly heavenly life. Because that is exactly what the blessed spirits do. They live completely within the will of God. However, there exists a profound distinction between us. Those who are blessed are perpetually enjoying and seeing all the magnificent effects brought about by a singular act of God's divine will. While we do not see that yet, but in exchange, we continue to grow and steadily keep making many more intentional acts and acquire new happinesses of our very own. So that is living life. Living in the divine will is living heaven here on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is the kingdom of the divine will that Jesus wants to give us, and that is why He left us asking for it. To live the life of the blessed here on earth, as I tell you, as we have already explained, the soul that already lives in the divine will, at what moment does it feel fear of death? At what moment does it feel that it is going to leave something behind? At what moment does it feel that it is going to suffer a separation from here? If you have already set your attention and your life there in the divine will, there is no longer that death, what is normally understood as death. Because you chose to live it voluntarily beforehand, and that has much greater merit. Because those at the point of death will have to leave it, but by force. Because they have no other choice. That is why they go to purgatory, because they did not want to let go freely and live in the divine will, to fill their lives with the will of God. But we, the souls who want to live in the divine will, let go of it voluntarily. All that is death, all that is sin, all that is earthly. We even let go of ourselves as well. And so that also has greater merit. To have done it in life, voluntarily, freely, and out of love for God, and not by force. For the soul that does my will and lives by my desire, there are no deaths. Death is for those who do not do my will, because they must die to many things. They must die to themselves, to their passions, to the world. On the other hand, the one who does my will has nothing to die to. She is already accustomed to living a heavenly life. For her, for this soul, it is nothing more than leaving behind her rags, as if she were taking off the clothes of a pauper to dress in the garments of a queen. To leave behind the clothes of a pauper, this body that is covering all that light, she is leaving it behind to be clothed in all that light. To dress in the garments of a queen and thus leave exile behind and arrive at her homeland almost in triumph. Because the soul that does my will is not subject to death, it has no judgment. Its life is eternal. What was supposed to be death has already been accomplished in advance by love, and my will has completely reordered her in me. So that now I have nothing left to judge her for? So then, remain in my will, and when you least expect it, you will find yourself in my will in heaven. That is why, when a soul dies in my will and enters the heavenly homeland, not only will the gates of heaven open, but all of heaven will come down to welcome her into the celestial dwelling. And to honor the accomplishment, to bring her into the celestial dwelling, and to honor the fulfillment of my will in her,